What's up, designers? Welcome back to the studio. Today I want to cover sort of an Illustrator alternative, the program GRAVIT Designer. So in a previous tutorial we talked about how to sort of start with our graphite drawings in the sketchbook and using a couple of different vectorizing techniques in Illustrator, basically piece this thing apart and start to redesign it or create an iteration. Digital is never going to replace your sketchbook. In fact, I kind of want you to get in the habit of thinking of them as sort of a side-by-side. But if you can't use Illustrator for whatever reason, GRAVIT is not a bad alternative. It's got some things about it that I'm not crazy about, but one of the best things is that it's free and it runs in sort of two ways. It runs either as a web app or something that you can download. If you go to the website, and I would just recommend doing a little Google search, GRAVIT, or you can use the link that's in the description here. If you download the program to your computer, you still need an internet connection in order to run it, unless you pay for the subscription. If you have the option, I think I would prefer that you guys learn Illustrator. But if your computer just can't run it, jump out to the GRAVIT design page and get yourself a downloaded copy. In a pinch, you can just use the web browser version, and you don't even have to download anything. So let's get into GRAVIT, the program, and see what we can do in terms of more or less reproducing this similar experience. When you launch GRAVIT, we'll do File, New, and you're going to get something like this that looks similar in a way to our experience in Illustrator, right? There are a lot of the same kind of initial prompts. What we're going to use is a piece of printer paper to kind of guide the sort of formatting of our first design document. 8.5 by 11 inch paper is usually what pops into most of the printers in your life. So go ahead and use an 8.5 by 11. Some of the keyboard shortcuts are going to feel familiar. Command minus, Command plus, that is going to be your zoom. And you should have this sort of drag and drop functionality in order to bring in your photograph, your drawing from a smartphone, or say you scan it on a flatbed scanner. Something I think it's important to kind of note here is the sort of smoothness of the operations in GRAVIT. Now, in general, I would say keep the number of running programs to a minimum whenever you're using design software. Adobe Illustrator is no different, right? If you're running Illustrator, definitely close down some of the other software. Don't stream videos at the same time unless you're using a pretty high power machine. In GRAVIT, I noticed that especially if I am using high quality or like really large images right from my phone, for example, right from my smartphone, 3.4 megabyte file for the photograph, it got really laggy and it did not want to do this image tracing or vectorizing technique. And so I did my best to sort of export the smallest file possible. I'm not going to demonstrate what laggy looks like. I think that's a really annoying experience to have even like outside of a tutorial. So if you're experiencing a really laggy design experience, start by shutting programs down and then also downsample your image. But when I say drag and drop, I mean basically you just kind of find yourself wherever that photograph lives. Hopefully it's on your desktop in a folder called 2D Design, and you should just be able to drag and drop right into your document in GRAVIT. Now what GRAVIT has here, right, is it's got that 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper here, and at least so far I haven't figured out whether or not it allows you to make use of this outside workspace, similar to how Illustrator lets me work with this huge workspace. I'm sure it's just, you know, me not really knowing the software yet, but at this point I've got to keep everything right inside my piece of paper. For that reason, I'm going to shrink the size of my initial photograph before I do much else. To do that, we'll use basically the same technique as we use in Illustrator. Use your selection tool, this black arrow up here. Hover over the corner and wait till we get this kind of sideways arrow and shrink it down. Now, if I goof it up and mess up the original look of that image, or kind of squish it and the aspect ratio is messed up, Command Z has the same functionality in GRAVIT. That's your edit undo option. And as I resize this time, I'll hold Shift. Holding Shift maintains the original aspect ratio. So the first move I want to do here is get this thing converted to vector. Go to Modify, Path, and Vectorize Image. Depending on the sort of quality of your original image and how fast your machine is, this could take a long time. I noticed that by using some of the larger files that came right from my smartphone, it literally crashed the program. So if you're having that problem, this is when you'll find out immediately. I'm going to shrink this down again. Somehow that got really big. And essentially what we've done here is the same thing as vectorizing our image in Illustrator. In Illustrator, I have a lot more options. The technique that we used is to go to Window, Image Trace, if you remember right. And in Image Trace, I just seem to have a lot more, there's a lot more built-in functionality. I can choose how many different levels, I can manipulate my threshold. The end result is just a little bit cleaner looking in GRAVIT, right? It doesn't seem to give me a whole lot of options for image tracing. It does the job. I mean, I've got reasonably decent version of my drawing here. I've got a lot of really interesting vectors to grab. If I zoom in really, really close though, I mean, take a look at these super broken edges. I mean, not a lot of detail was recovered. And so depending on how clean of a photograph you've gotten, you may lose a lot of the kind of individualness of these lines. That's okay though, because this digital translation project is not about reproducing your drawing. It's about trying to figure out what the computer will do in this translation and how I can riff on the kind of computer language. So I guess my next job here would be to try to take apart this design. And in GRAVIT, similar to Illustrator, I have a couple of different selection tools, V and D, or what it calls the pointer and the subselect. Now, I haven't quite kind of sussed out how exactly to sort of get a hold of individual pieces here, but my guess is that it's similar to Adobe Illustrator in that if I use one selection tool, it grabs everything, and if I use the other selection tool, it allows me to grab individual things. Now the individual things in this case appear to be like individual anchor points or individual vector points. That's what each one of these little squares is represented as in GRAVIT. So I guess what I'm kind of trying to get here is I'd like to be able to break out bigger chunks. To do that, I'm going to use my pointer tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'm going to try like what I usually do in Illustrator, double clicking into the design, and that may allow me to sort of get into more specific selection areas, and I'm just using the delete key to sort of tap those away. Now depending on the speed of your computer and whether you gave your computer a nap last night or not, this may take a long time. It's honestly a little laggy for me right now. I'll tap delete and it doesn't execute right away. This is one of the bits of functionality I kind of like about Illustrator, is that it's much more responsive. But if we're just doing some basic designs, and the sooner we can simplify this thing down to its most basic elements, probably the better. And so instead of focusing too much on deleting away all the things I don't want, I'm going to do my best to just grab a hold of something that I might be able to use, like this design here in the middle. So using the pointer tool, I'm going to see if I can't get a hold of just this design and do an option, click and drag, and see if that produces a copy. Sure enough, so Option on a Mac, Alt on a PC, and what this does is it's starting to give me the kind of ability to manipulate this design. It's pretty clearly kind of treating this as though it was a group. In Illustrator, this would be something I could just right-click, ungroup. In the event that I can't do that, maybe what I'll do instead is do a Command-C and then Command-V paste. That way it pastes it into its own individual group. Once I have this this shape, right, this is something that I have the freedom to manipulate, make multiple copies of. I can start to work with it within the design, not bounded by all this other stuff that's going on in my original here. So I like using these pieces. I think it's sort of an interesting way to generate shapes that I otherwise might not have built in Adobe Illustrator. Some of the functionality that I sort of like and I've got accustomed to in Illustrator is still here, right? If I want to make a quick copy, right-click, and most of these sort of feel similar to Illustrator. Transform, flip horizontal. Some of this stuff, it's going to translate. So when I record a tutorial for Illustrator and I give you guys a bunch of instructions, follow along because it appears as though there's a lot of crossover. this is about as far, right, as we really need to get in the tutorial. What I mostly want you guys to do is be able to get an image in, vectorize that image, and start to piece it apart and find some of these unique shapes and objects and turn them into an iteration. The iterations I've done in Illustrator, some of them were in black and white, some of them I introduced color. If you would like to introduce color into your designs, I think that would be cool. If you'd like to kind of flex some of your muscles in GRAVIT and see what else you can figure out, go ahead. Most of these programs are pretty rich and they're going to reward you for kind of digging around and playing. If you'd like a little help with that, check out the Moodle page, and I've included a link for the GRAVIT tutorial library on YouTube. This is something produced by the company, and a lot of these designers are going to be probably people who have submitted videos, but check it out because there's there's a decent number of things in here that will help kind of get you into the software and get you more comfortable. Now, I would say the same thing for Illustrator, except that I don't think Adobe really needs to be producing many tutorials because so many users of Illustrator have posted content to YouTube. Do yourself a favor. If you're running into trouble with, say, for example, how do I get color? Be as specific as possible with your question. Type it into Google, and my guess is that somebody out there has produced that tutorial in a really condensed way. My tutorials are going to tend to be a little bit thicker and specific to our current projects. Hey guys, I'm excited to see what you do with this, either in Illustrator or GRAVIT. I'll catch up with you in the studio.